Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Claire Robinson. I'm the Customer Relationship Manager here at KRC. Thank you for joining us for the third of our monthly Agile webinars. We've already covered mastering the basics of Agile and how to move forward. Last month we looked at how to engage with the business or customer more effectively, and today we'll be looking at facilitation and facilitated workshops. If you'd like to download the slides that accompany any of the webinars, you can find them under our free downloads section at AgileKRC.com. Today's slides will be available later this afternoon, and if you click on the link on the second to last page on those slides, you'll be able to register for next month's webinar, which will be on modelling. I'm shortly going to pass you over to your presenter, Keith Richards, but just before I do, I just want to point out a couple of the features of the control panel, just in case this is your first time using the software. So if you look at the top right-hand side of your screen, you'll see an orange box with a white arrow inside. You can click on this to maximise or minimise your control panel. And if you'd like to ask a question, just type your question into the question box and Keith will take these at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Keith Richards.
Thank you very much, Claire. And again, thank you to everyone attending. We're getting tremendous feedback on these webinars. Just been looking through some of the people who are turning up today. And we've got people from Barrow all the way to Brisbane. And we've also got some people in Bristol as well. Now today's workshop is very much, today's webinar is very much about facilitation and facilitated workshops. So if I just immediately get through to the structure, you can see how we can harness the power of Agile's hidden gem. It's not used that much in Agile, and I think you'll find that some of the things we'll go through on these slides you're going to find quite helpful. So the presentation structure, we'll go through some quick introductions, do the basics, we'll explain what the benefits are, explain how you can use it and when, and we will get down into some detail as opposed to just general concepts. We'll look at some specific techniques. We'll also look at some of the more advanced areas such as conflict, people disagreeing, and also the importance of things like listening. It's a little bit more to it than just saying listen. We'll go very sparingly on the commercials during the webinar, so we're trying to make it very content rich. There's a further information slide at the end, and then we'll go for some questions at the end if we haven't covered them during the actual webinar. Expecting to finish the presentation at 1:10 and that's UK time, and then 10 minutes after that we will take Q&A. So 35 minutes until Q&A. Very quick introduction slide so that you know where I'm coming from. Basically, I'm the MD of KRC. We like to see ourselves as pioneering, a little bit different. We've been specialising in Agile for a long time now, and some of the background that I personally have is in PRINCE and DSTM. But also, I'm an IAF accredited facilitator, so I have been through all the training, done all the practicals, and fortunately I've got the badge as well. So, cutting to the actual chase and getting on into some detail pretty quickly, what exactly is facilitation? It's a word that's used quite a lot, but what exactly is it? And sometimes it is quite difficult to actually define it or to put your finger on what exactly it is. So I have a couple of definitions for you here, and both have come from somebody called Ingrid Benz. She's got a tremendously strong reputation in the field of facilitation, and if anybody's looking for just a book recommendation, there's a very small pocket book called Facilitation at a Glance, and it's packed full of ideas. I think you can normally get this for less than £20, dollars or euros. It's not a particularly expensive book, and it's a very easy thing to just keep to your side. The first definition there is it's a way of providing leadership without taking the reins. Facilitator, or from the French word facile, which means to make easy, it's very much an enabling skill. The complete opposite would be command and control. Another definition from Ingrid is talking about focusing on asking as opposed to telling, listening and building consensus, and it's an essential skill, if you like, for working collaboratively. Now, since I've been in the Agile space, this term collaboration is just fundamental. I fundamentally believe you cannot work in an Agile environment unless you have a collaborative way of working, and you need facilitation to allow this collaboration to happen. If you like, it creates the oxygen that enables collaboration to actually take place. Now at KRC we've got a slightly different definition, but nothing particularly dramatically different, but something that we see as quite important is the idea of creativity. And I don't mean too much of the sort of pink and fluffy stuff. What I'm talking about is if you've got a lot of people in a room, they think differently, they act differently, they come at a problem from different angles, and if you harness all this in one go, you've got a tremendously creative, rich environment. And if you've got a goal that needs to be achieved and you get the right people in the room, this can be a tremendously productive way of actually working. Now, I don't just mean we're coming up with a new logo or a new slogan for something. It's not just the domain of, say, marketing and creative thinking. I'm thinking specifically of examples where you have a technical problem, you can't solve it, and you might be in a room with, a dozen people that are extremely detailed technical people. It's just if you harness the different ways of thinking and allow people to bounce off each other, you're going to get a very successful output. That is the power of the workshop approach and the facilitation approach. Now this word facilitation I'm using quite a lot. Facilitation, as I say, from the French facile, it's all about listening, playing things back and enabling a group of people to work. But there's a particular set piece event called a facilitated workshop, which is when a group of people come together for a specific problem. So I just want to be very clear on some of the definitions that have been used here. Firstly, a facilitated workshop is a group of people in a room, if you like. But facilitation is a much wider, broader beast, and that's what I'm going to also be touching on during this webinar, because you can use facilitation in if you like, a review with someone, on a career review, if you're doing some sort of performance appraisal. And the whole wider issue of, say, being facilitative is, if you like, a style. So you could manage in a sort of facilitative style as opposed to the command and control that I mentioned earlier. So just bear in mind there's, if you like, three flavors. The bigger picture is facilitation, and there's a subset, if you like, a set piece event called a facilitated workshop. Now, I met a friend of mine. I met a friend of mine a while ago, and he said to me, "How are you getting on with things?" And I said, "Oh, I'm doing pretty well, and I'm really enjoying workshops. We're doing, a lot of facilitated workshops, and I just find it absolutely fantastic." And he looked at me with a sort of look of horror, and he said that he'd been told by someone, a very reliable authority, that if somebody's actually talking about workshops and they're not talking about a room full of machines, then you're looking at an idiot. Now, this cut me down to the core slightly, because workshops do, if you like, have a little bit of a reputation of being perhaps a bit pink and fluffy at times. You get sort of cliches that you might see on comedy programs where, shall we workshop the idea, with a little bit of irony, if you like. And I think a lot of this has actually come from misusing the workshop approach, having a lot of people in a room and it not going particularly well, and it, if you like, in turn getting itself not a particularly good reputation. Well, hopefully during this webinar I can explain how we can, if you like, not necessarily get a good reputation for workshops, but very clearly explain what they are and how you can use them as a sort of a precision event whenever you've got a problem or a situation or an opportunity. So typically, and I must stress the word typically because it's not a parameter here and it's not a fact, but typically you might have 6 to 12 people in a room, and we're talking several hours. A day, quite typical. Half a day, quite typical. But again, it could be 2 or 3 days or 5 days if you've got a long session and you're trying to bottom out something pretty major, like a corporate strategy. You could have 3 or 4, you could have 20, 25. The most that I've ever facilitated was over 100. It's about 120. Now with the different sizes, you've got to use different techniques, but at the end of the day, you're still using facilitation. But a typical set piece event in, if you like, a corporate environment would be this sort of number of people. If it gets to 15, 18, 20, it's still possible, but it's starting to get quite big and it's starting to get quite difficult to manage. A lot of people think that workshops are just used for requirements gathering, just at the beginning of a project, and it is one of the, if you like, particularly good areas for using facilitation. But the fact of the matter is, you can use it anywhere, and a lot of people don't really see or don't really appreciate how much power you can get with facilitation and facilitated workshops if you're using it in the domain, for example, of planning. Project planning, planning a week, planning a year. It's a very productive way of working. Reviewing a document, reviewing a prototype, reviewing how the project's gone. As I say, a workshop environment with a facilitator is extremely effective. Problem solving is probably the classic. If you can remember that excellent scene in Apollo 13 where they were trying to get the astronauts back from the moon. They just got in a room, threw some stuff on a table and said, guys, we've got to get these guys back from the moon, and this is all we've got. It's a brilliant way, if you like, of using everybody's skill to solve a problem. Again, this could be a deep technical problem, it could be an opportunity, but collectively we can do this better than individually. Kick-off meetings on projects, risk assessment. If you've got 5 options or 4 pieces of software you're thinking of buying, assessing options is very much a situation where you can use things like facilitated workshops. Now, on the slide there it says there's perhaps a dozen, if you like, standard situations, give or take 2 or 3. There are not, if you like, hundreds of different types of workshop, but it is fair to say that every workshop, if you like, is unique or different. You can't just come with a ready-made agenda, okay, we're doing a risk assessment workshop, let's go and get the agenda we used last time. It doesn't quite work that way because there's certain things you need to do. Now, I've got a question for everybody, and we're going to run our first poll. And quite simply, I want to get from the people listening here what you see or what you perceive as the benefits of facilitated workshops. Why do you think they could be useful to you? So what I'm trying to look to here to see if we can come up with all the people who are on the webinar as what do you think are the most important things for a workshop to try and achieve, because it has many qualities, it has many powers, but what is it that you think is the main benefit of actually running a facilitated workshop? Now shortly you're going to find something coming up on your screen there, and there's 4 options. Now to make it slightly difficult for you, I really just want you to select one in terms of what you see as the main benefit of a facilitated workshop. So we'll give you a few moments there. In effect, they're all benefits of a sort. It's just what do you think? And the votes are all coming in quite nicely. I'll just give you another 10 seconds. Some quite interesting results coming here. Now I know it's a little bit tricky just trying to pick one, so what I'm going to do now is show everybody what everyone has put so you can get an idea of what other people are seeing workshops for and where they're, as I say, where they see the power of workshops. So I'm just going to close that poll so that you can now see it. Okay, let me just, I just need to check one thing here. Right, so in terms of the results that have come through, in terms of what's actually happened, very interestingly enough, speed actually got practically no votes at all in terms of the most important. The big one there is communication. Half of you, nearly half of you have actually said it's all about better communication. Now, ownership has been the second highest one there, and this idea of ownership is quite powerful in this workshop environment, that people actually own the result. And in third place there was creativity. So from my opinion, trying to feed back to the people listening in terms of what the how I see those sort of results, I would have gone for something like communication. It's a very rich communication environment. The one thing I do think is quite interesting, though, is how speed comes so low. Actually, working this way can be incredibly effective and incredibly quick, as opposed to going around and asking lots of people different sort of questions. So some interesting things there. I'm just now going to move back to the slides. And so why do these workshops? So let's just review some of the things that have been said there. Firstly, communication. It's perhaps the biggest single problem on a project, and therefore the idea of improving this communication can be extremely productive from the point of view of working as a group. If we're going around just having several one-to-one discussions, so if person A talks to person B, and then person A talks to person C, and person A talks to person D, what eventually happens is that you find that D starts to disagree with B, and person A has to go back and do it all again. So if we can get everyone in a room and all do it in one go, then this is a lot more beneficial. Group discussion is much more preferred. If you like, the sum of the parts the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. But you've got to be able to manage this. It's not quite simply a question of turning up and putting people in a room, and this is why the facilitator's role is so important, because it has to be managed. A group cannot sort itself out on its own in terms of high-speed communication. So in terms of when a group comes together, the questions you need to ask are, who actually is managing the process, who's managing the dynamics, and who's managing the actual content. So the process are the steps you're going through, the stages, the techniques you're using. That's very much the mechanical side of facilitation. The dynamics is more to do with the interpersonal behaviour, what's sort of kicking off in the actual workshop. Are people disagreeing, talking over each other? Are people folding their arms and shutting down? This is the softer, artistic side, if you like, of facilitation. And it's those first two things that the facilitator needs to be in charge of, own and control, the process and the dynamics. But importantly, if you have a facilitator in a facilitated workshop, they won't go anywhere near the content. And it takes quite a while to learn this and to be trained in it, and for the penny to drop sometimes. But the idea of not getting into the content and letting the actual delegates and the people in the room sort the content out, sometimes that feels counterintuitive. But a really good facilitator will sort the process out, the dynamics out, and won't go anywhere near the content. We need to leave the content to the group so that the group can actually sort out what's going on. The group can solve the problem. This then leads to the feedback from the poll there as to the benefits of actually working this way, whereby you get high speed because people are moving so quickly. You can cover more in 6 hours than you might do in 2 or 3 weeks if you were going to go for remote one-to-one or just sporadic discussions. You then get the high quality because a lot of exchange of ideas, different opinions, catching things early. The idea of ownership is the thing that personally I think I underestimated in the early days of group working. When everybody signs up to the deal, they've been part of the process, part of the creation of a solution. It's not a case of not invented here syndrome. They own the solution. It is their outcome, and they will run with it. And this is an extremely powerful thing to have. But don't sort of lose that creativity. Again, not necessarily soft and fluffy, but the fact that a group of people can create something is possible if you can harness the group working together as opposed to just individual. For example, trying to solve a problem by email is going to take you a tremendous amount of time as opposed to getting everybody in a room. So all of those four are really the benefits, and I would concur with the idea that this idea of the communication happening so quickly, the result from the poll, I would agree with that one. Final point there is the fact it's got to be done correctly. As I say, this is where the facilitator, if you like, earns their money or provides the value, in that you can't just let the group do this on its own. So how do you do it well? How do you actually run a workshop and make sure that it's actually run well? Well, there is a very simple saying that all facilitators will give you. What is the golden rule of success in facilitated workshops? And they will almost certainly say preparation, preparation, and preparation. And it is all in the preparation. If you can get that right, then you're halfway there. There's basically a 5-step process, and in order to get the best way of running a workshop. So if I just take you through those steps now, if you can just have a guess as to what's coming up, you can see whether you're right or wrong. But the 5-step process is as follows. First thing you need to do is to get a very clear objective. Write it on a post-it note, and in order to get that clear objective, you need to have someone who owns that problem. Who is the owner? Who's looking for this output? You cannot work on your own as a facilitator. Don't just have a workshop on testing strategy. You need a clear objective and someone to own that objective. It could be the person who, if you like, is sponsoring the workshop. The second thing you do is to think about which attendees need to attend in order to solve that particular objective. It's not like meeting up with some people after work, come on down to the restaurant if you fancy meeting up. You have to handpick these attendees, and they need to know they're being handpicked, because it's those people that will solve the objective. You also need to have as few as possible. You don't just want people being brought along who may be not empowered. So you have to handpick these attendees. The next thing you do is you come up with an agenda, the structure you're going through, the steps you're going to go through in the 3 hours or the day, and then you need to choose which techniques you're going to use at which point. It might be that you've got a group with some dominant people, therefore you might want to use breakout sessions or post-its a bit more. This is all about the thinking about how you're going to achieve the objective with the attendees. Another important thing is logistics. Don't leave this till the end. Everything from teas and coffees to, very importantly, what the room is like. If the room is too hot or too small, is there room to work on the walls? All of these things need to be taken into account beforehand. And it might be you need to set the room up for an hour before the actual event. And another good thing to do is to bundle this together, the agenda and some pre-reading, to send out to delegates so that they're forewarned and they know what's happening when they actually turn up for the workshop. You don't want something that I call the 9:37 moment, when you're sort of 37 minutes into the workshop and somebody says, I thought we were here to talk about testing strategy. It's all about preparation. It's worth going around and asking attendees whether they understand everything and they understand their role, but it's very important that this preparation takes place. You cannot turn up at a workshop and just wing it, as we say in the UK. And a tip for you, I would say, in terms of how much preparation is, I would say, if you're preparing for a one-day workshop, then it would not be anything out of the ordinary to spend 1 day preparing for it. A 2-hour workshop, 2 hours, and so on. But trust me, you will solve 80% of your problems in the preparation for a workshop. When can you use facilitated workshops? Well, very simply, you can use them at any time. A lot of people think they're just for front-loading early on in a project, for example, but you can use them at any time, not just the beginning. But I would suggest that you use them sparingly. There's a saying in the UK that you don't crack a nut with a sledgehammer, and the truth is that a lot of people leap into workshop mode and have a workshop for anything. One of the worst workshops I ever went to was when we had 20 people in a room and we were writing a letter, and we all got stuck on the second word, and we actually spent about 30 minutes thinking what the second word was. The first word was dear. But the second word, we weren't sure whether it was customer, prospect, prospective customer, and it was just a very poor waste of 20 people's time. It would have been much better if someone had drafted the letter and then circulated it, and maybe we could have had a small meeting for about half an hour to clarify that afterwards. Go careful, use them sparingly. Sometimes a simple conversation by the coffee machine is much better than, as I say, using the sledgehammer. Because I keep saying how important they are in terms of speed and quality, but the important thing also to remember is they are not cheap. If you're taking 20 people out of a room for a day, that is expensive, and you better make sure you're getting value for money. But again, the general term facilitation, you can use that at any time. You can just use that whenever you want. It's in the more general sort of idea. Now, in terms of specifics, in terms of specific techniques, I just want to give you some ideas of some things that are well known, and just to sort of leave some thoughts with you as to whether they're, how good they are or how appropriate they are. And probably the most common and most well known is SWOT, which is about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And another one is Ishikawa or fishbone diagramming, where you maybe use a technique called PESTLE, where you look at things from a political, environmental, strategic, technological, economic and sort of legal framework, and these are the two probably the most commonly well known and most used, but I have a slight problem with them, and I would warn people not to use them as a sort of a default, because I've been in many SWOT sessions where people are saying what's the difference between a strength and an opportunity, and then sometimes there's a big discussion about inside the castle and outside the castle, and it can get very complicated. And my advice to everybody when they're using any of these things is to keep it simple. As the saying goes, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, and just use simple techniques to start with before you get into any of these more complicated and slightly contrived approaches. Now, don't get me wrong, SWOT and Ishikawa are really good at certain things, but generally I find if you put a piece of flip chart paper on the wall, divide it into two columns, one side is what went well, the other side is what didn't go so well. It's pretty easy, plus and minus, good, not so good. I think you can move up a level to maybe sort of 4 boxes. Sometimes there's something called the Boston grid or the Boston box, or impact effort grid, where perhaps you have 2 axes, and something as simple as that is actually quite good and quite useful. Gap analysis I use quite a lot, which is really just 3 pieces of paper. The first piece of paper is where we are. The third piece of paper, if you like, is where we're trying to get to, and the piece of paper in the middle is your action plan. What have we got to do to get from the first page to the third page? And it's really simple. As long as you don't combine those steps, it's a very simple way of getting people to move forwards. So I would strongly recommend that you just keep these things simple. And another simple prioritization approach is Moscow, where again you could have 3 pieces of paper. What must we have? What should we have? What could we have? And it's simple. It's very easy to use. But as I say, the mantra is quite simply keep it simple and don't let the technique get in the way. I've seen people in a workshop with a post-it going around going, is this legal or environmental? And the point is, the post-it's valid. It doesn't really matter whether it's legal or environmental. Get it up on the board, because that's going to help us to get to our goal. Now, some simple tips for you and simple techniques to help you make some big improvements quickly with your facilitation. The first one is something that I find particularly useful, and I'm amazed how effective it is. And you can pick this up straight away, but it's something I call the power of the nod. If you are with a group of people, let's say you're talking to about 10 people, and you say, is everyone okay with this? What you need to learn is how to scan the room and just look into people's eyes and wait for them to nod. And they will nod if they agree. But the important thing is, they won't nod if they don't agree. Now, that sounds a silly point, or maybe stating the obvious, but people don't tend to shake their head or say no because they're not sure. But they honestly will not nod unless they agree. So if you've got 10 people, 9 of which are just looking at you smiling and nodding, and 1 person isn't, it's a very powerful situation where you can realize, hang on a minute, not everybody's with me on this, or not everybody's together on this. So maybe that person you might want to look at, just hold a look a little bit longer and goes, is everyone okay? And if the person still isn't nodding, you might need to speak to them and say, Larry, you don't seem convinced. Can you tell us a bit more? So the power of the nod is amazing. And what tends to happen when people aren't very good at facilitation is, you know, 3/4 of the room say, yeah, we're fine, and off we go. But what you're trying to do, if you're doing it well and doing it properly, is you're trying to achieve consensus and not compromise. Democracy 7-3 isn't what we're trying to do with workshops. We're trying to get 10-0. Understand the importance of silence. When you can pause and let people think, it's quite powerful. Extrovert people talk and then listen to what they're saying, but the introverts are more internal. They internalize and they think before talking. If you move too quickly and you don't allow pauses and periods of silence, you will only take half of the room with you, which will mainly be the extrovert people who might be dominating proceedings. Try and learn some key techniques, and it's slightly ironic that the more you learn and the longer I've been doing this, you suddenly make things easier and easier and easier and more simple, but it takes a while to create simplicity. But here's a couple of examples of what I mean, is that when you're dealing with a group of people, just to ask a simple question, what does anyone think about that? And then saying nothing, you know, don't add things like options or suggestions after it. Just say, what does anybody think about that? What's anyone's view? And just stay silent. This then gets the group working. Again, if you're trying to clarify understanding, you know, don't interpret or try and act as an editor to what people are saying. Just a simple technique is, what shall I write on the flip chart? I've been in a room for 2 hours with 20 people, and all I've said is, what do you want me to write on the flip chart? And it's a highly effective way of getting them to own the output. So simple sort of techniques there. There's a technique that I quite like, which I use, and I call it stacking. And if you can do this, it looks very good in a workshop. So if somebody's talking and then, you know, person A tries to come in, but they can't come in, you need to be aware that they want to come in. And if you sort of look at them and just put it in your head that that person's trying to get in, that can be, you know, that's really good facilitation. Then if another person tries to get in and another, you've got to learn to stack these people, if you like, in a row, a bit like airplanes. And then when the person who's talking is finished, if you can then say, right, I just want to bring person A in, and B and C, I'll come to you in a moment, that looks really, really good. And it means people don't have to interrupt when they're actually working in a workshop, because they know you're going to bring them in. And as I say, it's called looking after people, and when you're on the receiving end of that, it feels very good. It just looks really cool. Now remember, whenever you get into a workshop, there's often a lot of post-its flying around, but there is a bit more to life than post-its. So you know, use them carefully. That they're very good. They're very fast. They make people succinct. You can use them for planning. They are quite a powerful little tool, but you don't really want to go post-it crazy all the time, so that every time you go into a workshop, somebody, you know, looks at you and goes, oh no, it's not the post-its again, is it? But as I say, as an effective facilitator's tool, certainly anyone who's on the nursery slopes or beginners, they're very powerful. And as I say, they're not the be-all and end-all, but they are pretty useful. Just use them carefully and use them at the right place and the right time. The most common question I get from anybody is actually, how do you handle conflict? This is, if you like, what most people seem to want to know. It's the most common question, and ironically the answer is almost certainly going to be counterintuitive to most people, because if people are disagreeing or arguing during a workshop, one of the most important things you need to do is to actually get it out into the open. You need to let the conflict breathe. You need to give it airspace. So if two people are starting to get argumentative or talking over each other or shaking their head or, you know, perhaps getting a bit emotive, you need to step in and you know, put a spotlight on it, to be honest. So if, you know, if Dave is arguing with Mary, you need to then say, right, hang on, Dave, I'm going to give you, you know, the floor's yours for 1 or 2 minutes. You say where you're coming from. I'm then going to bring in Mary, and then I'm going to throw it to the rest of the group. What you can do by airing it and getting it into the open is people can deal with it. If you don't do it that way, the thing will fester, it will bubble away, it could come up later in the workshop, it could come up later in the project. It's a very important thing to address, and this is why, as the facilitator, you have to move quickly on it. You have to address it. Now when I say move quickly, you don't need to leap in immediately and start pulling people apart, but you've got to start thinking how you're going to solve it. So you've got to instantly come up with how you're going to go about this, and then, if you like, time your intervention very, very carefully. As I say, you don't need to go straight in the first second, but the longer you leave it, you know, the wound could grow, it could fester. You've got to go in and address this straight away. Now this looks good when you do it, because the people feel then that they can actually contribute and they can make their case, despite the fact it might be a bit controversial. In terms of areas of facilitation, in terms of the wider picture, you need to understand that facilitation, you know, is quite a long journey. As I say, Rome wasn't built in a day, and you can't really pick facilitation up in just a day. There's an irony. When I was getting into it, I felt that actually the more that I was learning, it seemed the bigger the subject area was and the less that I actually knew. You need to, if you're going to push your facilitation to, you know, the boundaries and go you know, deeply into it, you need to work out how groups work. Things like, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of Myers-Briggs, Belbin, group dynamics, you know, the forming, storming stuff, but you need to really work out what's in the room with you, because people are a bit funny at times. Again, the counterintuitive stuff as you get more skill is you need to know when to let go. You need to know when to trust the group. That's a very powerful saying that facilitators use, because when you trust the group, you're saying the group will sort itself out. I just need to come in and add adjustments and corrections. The big area of counterintuitive stuff in facilitation is this thing about how much structure to put onto a group. I see many facilitators, particularly in the early days, have lots and lots of structure, lots of charts, lots of steps, and sometimes the key to success is actually less structure. If you've got a more blank canvas, the group can move around. For example, if you're trying to gather requirements, you know, just gather requirements and put them on a blank sheet of paper. It's a very simple mistake a lot of people make and say, well, we need registration requirements, we need payment requirements, billing requirements, you know, and putting more structure on the team and on the group that is needed. But the skill of letting go and trusting the group and trusting a group of people to get on their feet and rearrange a lot of post-its in a sort of chaotic manner takes a lot of confidence and a lot of experience. But if you do let a group, you know, just prioritize 50 post-it notes in 5 minutes, you can then review what they've done. You can check, you know, the unusual bit, because a group will normally agree on 80% of everything. You just need to then go in and review the 20% they're not agreeing on. So this is quite advanced, this stuff, but as I say, letting go, trusting the group, that's when you start to really get into the really sort of powerful areas of facilitation. Again, don't forget the classic word listening, and remember the Furby. I'm sure some of you on some webinars have heard me refer to the Furby before, which has got big eyes, big ears, and a small mouth. That is what a facilitator needs to be like. And when I say they need to sort of listen, there's a bit more to listening than meets the eye. A classic thing I look for in facilitators is what I call the talk-listen ratio. How much is the facilitator talking, and how much is the group talking? Because remember, if you're talking and coming up with ideas and suggestions, firstly you're getting into content, and secondly the group that you've handpicked isn't talking. So it's very important to remember that this listening is one of the most powerful things you can have, but that's different to staying silent. You know, what are people saying? There's some tremendous quotes from people like Covey, whereby you have things like, if you want to be understood, seek first to understand. And this thing about listening is core to a facilitator. If you're in a one-to-one situation, let's say you're counseling, then this idea of listening, and if anybody wants to look up something on the web, which is quite powerful stuff, take a look at something called ALT, Active Listening Technique. It is amazing how it teaches you to listen, and I think you'll be quite surprised by some of the things that you actually read there. Again, managing your team facilitatively, you know, listening to your team, what are they saying, and not really seeing them in your own image, really listening to where they're coming from, what's their baggage, what are they good at. And this is why facilitation is seen as carrot and not stick. And in the Agile space, you have to manage in that sort of way. Now this is pretty powerful stuff, and if you can just start building on this bit by bit, I think you'll find that it can be quite life-changing. It's certainly changed the way I approach anything, and I wish I'd come across it a lot earlier. At KRC, we go into lots of companies and help them with Agile, and one of the first things we do is listen. There's no point coming in saying, oh, you need DSTM, you need Scrum, you need Facilitation. The first thing we do when we're talking to them is to say, you know, what are you good at? What are you having problems with? Because then we can solve the problem of the customer. And if we solve the problem they've got, you know, we've got more chance of the engagement being a good engagement and lasting. So a couple of final slides, and we'll then have a look at some of the questions that are coming through. And one important thing about training in facilitation, and this one isn't a commercial, by the way, for KRC, this is just giving you some advice. Be very careful when you go out and get facilitation training, because quite a lot of, if you just type in facilitation training, you get quite a lot of what I call happy clappy, and that is people who are maybe, you know, it was okay 10 or 20 years ago, but it's, you know, a lot of things about energizers, icebreakers, tremendous feelings of oneness and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, if you were a biscuit, what sort of biscuit would you be? But trust me, when you're working in corporate environments, you need to be what I call corporate strength with your facilitation. You can really disengage people with the too much of the, you know, what does the group think? You know, do you really dare? All that sort of stuff. And therefore, you've got to have what I call corporate strength facilitation. You know, you're going to be working with a lot of potentially, you know, highly qualified, highly valued professional people, and sometimes some of the older techniques come across as a little bit patronizing, and therefore make sure your training is very current. You can only learn by doing this. We've unfortunately, and don't mind sharing this secret, unfortunately lost a bit of work recently in terms of a tender, and we quite simply lost it on the basis that our course was too practical. And I don't mind losing in that sort of context, because you cannot learn facilitation by reading a book or doing the theory. You've got to stand up and do it. You've got to make mistakes. You've also got to feel what it's like to be facilitated. So if you're on a course with 5 people and you're running a couple of workshops, you get 8 chances to be on the receiving end of a workshop, and this is one of the most powerful, most productive ways of actually learning. Standing up there, you know, it is quite difficult, and I've probably trained several thousand facilitators, and I've actually only met one natural facilitator, and everyone is good at certain things. You're either good at the personal stuff, you're good at the process, you're good at staying out of things, but it takes learning, because some of this is counterintuitive, to actually become good at it. And as I say, the line there is saying no one is a natural. I don't think people are naturally facilitative or can naturally go and run a workshop in, say, a corporate environment. I certainly know when someone explained facilitation to me in the beginning, I thought, how can you put someone who's neutral, who doesn't really know too much about the problem, in a room with people that do know the problem? How on earth can that work? It makes no sense. It took me a bit of time until the penny dropped and I changed my mind 100%. Right, I'm now going to start getting to some questions. Firstly, just an information slide for you in terms of some training coming up and our next webinar. I'm just going to leave that there in terms of, you can read that at your leisure. I'm now going to see if anyone on this webinar has got any questions. So if you've got any questions, go to your control panel and try and type something into the question area. I've got some coming in, so I'm going to try and address those as best that I can. So I've got a question from Ian, which is quite good actually. It's not quite a question, and I don't know if Ian knows that I actually know the quote that he's actually coming up with. But there's a very famous Attorney General for New York, I think, about 10 years ago, and his name slightly escapes me, but it's called Elliot Spitzer, I think, and he came up with this brilliant quote or quotation, which was never write when you can talk, never talk when you can nod, and never nod when you can wink. And what the point of this is to say that if you can actually see each other face to face, it's a much better way of communicating. If you can only use voice, then okay, use that. But actually, if you're down at the level of just email or text, it's a very poor form of communication. So if you want to dig that quote up from somewhere, in fact, Ian, I think it's slightly different. I've just read it, and when I got to the end, I'm trying to think from memory here. It says, yeah, don't write when you can talk, and as you say, oh yeah, don't talk when you can nod, meaning you can see each other. So maybe I need to check that out a bit more thoroughly next time. I've got a question from Phil, and it's talking about, can you run a workshop via teleconference / webinar, etc.? What techniques can you use if you can't get the group into one room? Should you even attempt it? The short answer is yes, you should attempt it, and yes, you can do lots of things. And with remote working, if you've got people working in, say, India and Norway and America, you can't get people into the same room at the same time. So using more powerful conferencing type software that's around now, such as things like that you're using at the moment, GoToWebinar, there's at least a dozen ways of using sort of virtual training and virtual sort of facilitation techniques. The secret is to make sure, again, you prepare, everybody's got the agenda, they know what they're doing. You don't quite get the same interaction, but if you've got big plasma screens and somebody's facilitating it very carefully, you can actually get a lot of power from it. It is a little bit technological. There's nothing really better than being in a room with tactile stuff. So it is actually, there are some drawbacks there from a technology point of view. But you can go miles with Skype if you want. But the point about should you attempt it, yes. But people exhibit funny behaviours when they're doing a sort of video conference. One particular one is everyone stares at the television screen. Even though they don't need to. If you're in the room with people, you'd be staring at your notebook and staring out of the window and thinking to yourself. But when you put a television in the room, for some reason, everyone, like Muppets, just sort of stares at it. So you need to break some of those things down. And one of the most powerful things I've seen is actually a workshop just done by telephone. And again, the facilitator can bring people in, which enables everyone to talk at the right time in the right place. So it is second best, but it is still worth doing. And a lot of the organisations I'm dealing with are running sort of daily, what are called stand-ups in the morning, and they're just all standing around plasma screens. I know one company that actually set their plasma screen up on a table and had the same table at the other location, so it almost looked as though everybody was sitting around the same table. Now, you don't need to go for that, but as I say, it's something to think about. Another question I got from Sarah is it ever a good idea to facilitate a workshop on your own project? The temptation to join the content discussion is too great, surely. I think the short answer to that is yes, the temptation is too great. The reality of the situation is, though, that sometimes you've got to run that session and you're the project manager. So my advice to you is to try and step in and out on the agenda. So maybe run 20 minutes in a facilitative way and say, look, I'm not going to contribute for these 20 minutes. I want to know what you're saying. And then, if you like, put another hat on, not literally, but say, I'm now going to come in as the project manager. This is my view. But you can still be facilitative. It's just you're not truly independent, and the group will know that you're not neutral, and that's the issue with facilitating your own workshop. What else have we got here? Tips for a retrospective workshop. Mahesh has got a question there. I go through basically a three-step process. The first thing on a retrospective is to have one sheet of paper and say what went well. I get people working in pairs for this so they can discuss. I then have a sheet what didn't go so well, and then I have a third sheet to say actions going forward. So normally that is correcting the things that didn't go so well, because the things that went well you just need to do more of. One big tip I'd give you for retrospectives, though, is you can come out of a retrospective with about 15 ideas and you'll end up doing none of them. If you could come up with 2 or 3, prioritize them, and make sure those get into your next time box or your next sprint. I think that's a good idea. A question from Paul. I'm just going to overrun by 2 or 3 minutes so that we've got these. I'm just going to overrun by, as I say, 2 or 3 minutes to get just another question or two in. Paul is asking, how effective is distributing pre-reading? Getting attendees to read material before is very difficult. Would it not be better to work on the assumption that nobody's done the pre-reading? Paul, you're touching a very interesting point there, because what happens is half the people that get pre-reading read it straight away, and the other half read it on the morning of the workshop. What you've got to do as a facilitator is get to them 2 days before and say, have you got any questions about the pre-reading? Can you make sure that you do the pre-reading? Because it can really mess your workshop up if somebody turns up at 9:30 and says, sorry guys, but this is an old process. This isn't how sales work anymore. This is 2 years old. That sort of thing can blow a workshop to pieces. So I think it is the right thing to do, and I think it can be very effective because everybody gets prepped and primed and ready to roll. It's just you've got to go around and make sure it has happened. It's just a character trait with, I would suggest, 50% of people. They leave things till the last minute. It's a natural thing, so it's not a problem, but you need to address it. So pre-reading, go for it. I take your sentiment about the assumption, but I wouldn't go there. And a final thing from Vanny is, how does the command of language or over language affect facilitation? And I think this is where, in your preparation, working with the owner, you can find out whether everybody is speaking the same language, or what languages we need to use. But also the actual language people use themselves is quite powerful. Some people can use very patronizing words, slightly bullying words. One of my favorite examples is the word obviously. When someone starts a sentence with obviously, it is quite it's quite a demeaning thing, and therefore as a facilitator, not only have you got to be aware of different languages from different countries, you've also got to be aware of the language people are using. It's something quite a powerful area that the facilitator needs to get into. Right, I think because I'm mindful that it's the middle of the day certainly for the people in the UK, and they might need to get back to meetings, I'm going to hand back to Claire now and say thank you very much for your attention, thank you for your questions. Any questions that I've not addressed during this Q&A session, we will address immediately after, so I will make sure everybody gets a question. I'm getting excellent feedback on the question panel saying thanks, and that's really nice to get that. If anyone can think of any further webinars or anything that we can improve the way we do this, please let us know. But for the moment, I'm now going to hand back to Claire.
Thanks for that, Keith. That was a really great session once again, and thank you again for everyone for joining us today, and we hope we'll see you all again at the end of next month, April the 27th at midday, for modelling in agile environments. Like I say, the slides will be available on our website later on this afternoon to download. That's at AgileKRC.com. Click on free downloads on the homepage and you'll find all sorts of things that you can download. Lots of presentations written by Keith, white papers, case studies, all sorts of things. So if anybody wants to contact us, if you have any questions that weren't answered, or if you think of anything that you want answering, do drop us an email. You can contact me at c.robinson@agilekrc.com. And yep, if you want to know anything about the other facilitation services that we offer, please do get in touch. So that leaves me just to say thanks again to Keith Richards, and thank you all for attending. Bye for now.